Legends aren't born. They're forged in dust, hunger, and impossible choices. Welcome to No Limit Stories. If this story burns in your chest, show you're not just passing through. The price of silence. I'm going to tell you about the hottest day Dry Stone had seen in 20 years. It was August 1882, and old Joaquin's thermometer read 115 degrees in the shade. But it wasn't the heat that made the men gathered at the auction yard sweat. It was the shame, though few would admit it. Between barrels of watered whiskey and horses half dead from thirst stood a platform of rotted wood. Upon it, a figure that barely cast a shadow. They called her many things: the mute one, the Indian, the shadow. Nobody knew her real name because nobody had bothered to ask in the 3 years she'd been passed from hand to hand. She was perhaps 17, though it was hard to tell beneath the bruises and dirt. Her bare feet bled where iron chains had cut the flesh. One eye was swollen shut. The other stared into emptiness with the determination of someone who'd learned that meeting men's eyes only brought more pain. "Gentlemen," shouted Tobias Crane, the auctioneer. He was as fat as a hog with the same grace. "We have here a unique opportunity. A domestic servant, half Apache, they tell me, though I'd wager she's got Mexican blood too. Doesn't talk much, which is an advantage for some of you." Greasy laughter from the crowd. "Eats like a bird and works like a mule. Who'll give $5? The silence was thick as molasses. Even these men, accustomed to buying and selling cattle and stolen land, felt something twisted about buying a person so evidently broken. For dollars. Crane's voice lost confidence. $2.50, said a voice from the back of the crowd. Every head turned. A man pushed through the throng. He wasn't particularly tall or broad, but he moved with the certainty of someone who'd survived more storms than he could count. He wore a wide-brimmed black hat that hid his eyes, a faded serape over a shirt that had once been white, and boots that had walked more miles than any map could show. A Winchester rifle rested casually on his shoulder, and a Colt .45 hung low on his right hip. "Who the hell are you?" Crane spat. The man looked up, revealing a face weathered by sun and years, with eyes as gray as cold steel. "Samuel Cortez. And it's $3, not $2.50. $3 is an insult for a Christian life," Crane protested, though he was already pulling out the sales ledger. Samuel dropped 3 silver coins on the platform. The sound rang like church bells in the silence. "An insult is what you're doing here. Take your money before I change my mind and decide no man should profit from this." Samuel didn't wait for paperwork. He took the keys to the chains from Crane's hands and guided the girl out of the yard, away from the stairs and whispers. In the back alley, beside a horse trough, he knelt and began opening the shackles. She trembled when the metal fell away, as if the chains had been the only thing keeping her upright. Samuel pulled from his saddlebag a piece of hard bread, a strip of jerky, and a clean cloth he dampened in the trough. "Here," he said, offering the cloth first. "For your wounds." She looked at it like it might vanish, like it might turn into a whip or a trap at any moment. But she took the cloth and began cleaning the dried blood from her wrists. "I'm not asking you to trust me," Samuel said while she ate slowly, chewing each bite as if she'd forgotten how. "Just asking you not to run. At least not today. Tomorrow you can decide." They walked to where 2 horses waited, tied to a post. One was as black as a moonless midnight. The other was pinto with spots that looked like maps of unexplored territories. Samuel mounted the black and extended his hand. For the first time, she looked up enough to meet his eyes. There was something there, buried under layers of pain and distrust. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was just the cold calculation of someone measuring what kind of hell this would be compared to the last. She took his hand. Her grip was weak but determined, and she climbed up behind him with the grace of someone who'd once known how to ride before the world taught her to crawl. They rode in silence while Dry Stone became a bad memory on the horizon. The sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Only when they reached a small canyon with a thin stream winding between dry cottonwoods did Samuel stop the horses. "We'll camp here," he announced, dismounting with movements measured by fatigue. "There's water for the horses and wood for a fire." While he set up camp, she sat on a flat rock, knees against her chest, watching every movement like a wild animal studying a trap. Samuel worked with practiced efficiency. He unsaddled the horses, dug a pit for the fire, and spread 2 blankets on opposite sides of the future campfire. "I've got beans, bacon, and coffee," he said while lighting the fire. "It's not hotel food, but it fills the stomach." They ate in silence while the first stars appeared. The only sound was the crackling fire and the occasional neigh from the horses. When the flames began to die down, she finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, barely more than a whisper. Do you have family? Samuel stirred the embers with a stick. No, not anymore. Wife? Children? Had a wife. She died 3 winters ago. Fever. We had no children. She nodded slowly. Better that way. Why do you say that? For the first time, something like a bitter smile crossed her face. Men with families don't buy strange girls at auctions. Men with families have too much to lose. Samuel looked at her across the fire. Maybe. Or maybe men without families are the only ones free enough to do what's right. Dawn came, painting the canyon in shades of pink and orange. The narrator continued. Samuel was already awake, coaxing last night's embers to heat coffee. The aroma was what woke her, that and the soft murmur of Samuel talking to the horses while he brushed them. She sat up slowly, each movement revealing new pains. In the daylight, her wounds were more evident. Not just the fresh bruises, but old scars that told stories of years of abuse. There's coffee, Samuel said without turning. And beans left from last night if you're hungry. She approached the fire slowly and accepted the hot metal cup between her hands. The first sip made her cough, but the second seemed to bring some life back to her eyes. Where are we going? She asked. I have a ranch west of Red Canyon. It's not much, but it's quiet. You can stay until you decide what to do. And if I decide to stay forever, then you'll need to learn to herd cattle. She extended her wrists toward him. The scars formed intricate patterns, some old and white, others more recent and still pink. In Clear Spring, where I was the last 2 years, the master said pretty hands were for ladies. Servants needed hands that told stories of work. Samuel felt bile rise in his throat. Clear Spring? Don Rodrigo Malvado. She looked at him surprised. You know him? By reputation. They say he's the richest man between here and San Antonio. They also say he's the cruelest. Both things are true. She lowered her hands. I broke a porcelain jug. It was his mother's, he said. Worth more than me, he said. So he took the pieces. She stopped, swallowed. He said if I broke beautiful things, he'd teach me how it felt to be something broken. Samuel pulled something from his saddlebag. It was a copper locket, simple but well kept. He opened it, revealing a faded photograph of a young woman with kind eyes. This was Isabel, my sister, he said. She died at 16. Before dying, she gave me this locket. Said to keep something beautiful close to my heart, so I wouldn't forget beauty exists even when the world seems bent on showing only its ugliness. He extended the locket to her. She looked at it as if it were something sacred or dangerous, perhaps both. I can't. I'm not giving it to you. I'm lending it. Until you find your own beauty to keep. With trembling hands, she took the locket. She held it to the light, studying the image. She looks like you. That's what they said. Though she was the smart one in the family. How did she die? Typhus. Half the town fell that year. She tended the sick until the disease claimed her too. Samuel stood and began packing up camp. She was the kind of person who saw someone suffering and couldn't just walk by. The girl hung the locket around her neck, hiding it under her tattered blouse. Like you. I just bought trouble for $3. She would have given her life for free. I don't have a name anymore, she said suddenly. The last master said dogs don't need names, just whistles. The one before called me China, though I'm not Chinese. Before that. She shrugged. I don't remember. Then choose a new one. You're free to be whoever you want to be. She touched the locket through the fabric. Hope, she said finally. I'll call myself Hope. Until I remember who I used to be. The narrator paused for water, then continued with renewed vigor. They'd been riding for 3 days when trouble found them. It was in Devil's Canyon, a place with an appropriate name where red rock walls rose like the walls of hell itself. Samuel felt it first, that tingling at the back of his neck that tells you you're prey, not hunter. He stopped his horse with a subtle gesture, listening. Hope, who'd begun to relax during these days of quiet travel, tensed immediately. Company, Samuel murmured. 3 riders, maybe 4. Coming fast. They had no time to hide properly. The riders appeared at the canyon entrance like wolves smelling blood. There were 3, and Samuel recognized the type. Bounty hunters, the scum who made their living returning lost property to their rightful owners. The leader was a tall man with a faded Confederate military coat, more for affectation than loyalty to a lost cause. The other 2 looked like brothers, both bald and pockmarked, with the dead eyes of those who'd sold their humanity piece by piece. Hold there, shouted the leader, raising a hand as the three reined in their mounts about 30 yards away. Looking for Samuel Cortez. I'm told that might be you. Samuel kept his hands visible but close to his weapons. Lots of folks named Samuel in these parts, but not many who bought defective merchandise in Dry Stone 3 days ago. The man smiled, revealing gold teeth. I'm Marcus Iron. I come on behalf of Don Rodrigo Malvado of Clear Spring. It seems you have something that belongs to him. I don't see anything here that belongs to anyone but itself, Samuel replied. Iron laughed. Ah, an idealist. My favorite kind of fool. Look, we can do this easy or hard. The bounty is $200 for you, dead or alive. The girl, well, she needs to be breathing, but nobody said anything about her being intact. Hope spoke for the first time, her voice cutting the air like a blade. I'd rather die here than go back. That can be arranged, Precious, said one of the bald brothers, reaching for his gun. The world exploded in violence. Samuel was faster, his Colt roaring before the bald man completed his movement. The bullet hit him in the chest, throwing him from his mount. The second brother fired wildly, bullets whistling overhead. On the left, Hope shouted, seeing the leader flanking them. Samuel rolled from his mount, using the horse as a shield. He fired under the animal's belly, hitting Iron's horse. The beast reared, throwing its rider against the rocks. The surviving brother, seeing his companions fallen, wheeled around and spurred his horse toward the canyon exit. Samuel let him go. He'd learned long ago that sometimes letting an enemy live sent a stronger message than killing him. He approached where Iron lay groaning, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. The hunter looked at him with pure hatred. Malvado won't stop, he spat. He has more money than God and twice the spite. He'll send his brother Diego next time, and that bastard won't come to negotiate. Then tell Diego we'll be waiting, Samuel said. I won't tell him anything. I'll bleed out right here. Hope approached, looking at the fallen man. For a moment, Samuel thought she might kick him or spit. Instead, she tore a strip from her skirt and threw it to him. For your leg, she said. Not because you deserve it, but because I choose to be better than the men who hurt me. After the encounter at Devil's Canyon, the narrator continued, Samuel knew they needed to disappear from the main trail. He led them north toward Dead Land, a place even the most optimistic maps didn't bother to detail. It was a landscape that seemed designed to break spirits. Black rocks emerged from the earth like rotten teeth. Cacti grew twisted and poisonous. Water was scarcer than mercy, and the sun fell like a hammer on an anvil. But Hope didn't complain. She'd begun to sing as they rode, soft melodies in a language Samuel didn't recognize. When he asked, she explained, they're songs my grandmother taught me. Before, she said when the world is cruel, singing is an act of rebellion. Was your grandmother Apache? Half Apache, half Mexican. Like me. She said that made me doubly unwanted and doubly strong. They stopped only when the horses threatened to collapse. Samuel found a depression in the rocks where generations of rain had carved a small cave. It wasn't much, but it would protect them from the midday sun. While the horses rested in the shade, Samuel dug in a place where the sand looked darker. It was an old trick a Hope he had taught him years ago. At 2 feet deep, the sand became moist. At 3 feet, water began to seep. Not enough to fill the canteens, he said, but it'll keep the horses alive. Hope helped him dig, her hands working without complaint despite the still fresh wounds. When they finally had enough water for the animals to drink, they sat exhausted against the rock wall. Why Dead Land? She asked. Because even men like Malvado have places they won't go. This is one of them. They say it's cursed. Is it? Samuel shrugged. Only for those who bring their own curses. That night, they found a long-abandoned gold prospector's camp. 3 tattered tents and a wagon with a broken wheel were all that remained of someone's dreams. But there was a well, and though the water tasted of iron and salt, it was water. While they prepared dinner with the last provisions, a sound alerted them. It wasn't threatening, but pitiful. A low, constant whine from behind the wagon. Hope went to investigate before Samuel could stop her. He found her kneeling beside a mangy dog, so thin you could count its ribs. The animal had a swollen hind leg, hot to the touch. Snakebite, she diagnosed. But old. No more venom, just infection. Without asking permission, she took her canteen and poured water on the wound. The dog whimpered but didn't bite. With infinite care, she cleaned the wound and wrapped it with strips from her increasingly shorter skirt. Where did you learn that? Samuel asked. In one of the places I was, there were dog fights. If you wanted to eat, you learned to keep the dogs fighting. If you wanted to sleep without nightmares, you learned to heal them after. The dog, as if understanding it had found salvation, licked her hand. For the first time since Samuel had known her, Hope smiled. Not much, barely a curve of her lips, but genuine. Can we take him? Samuel looked at the half-dead animal, another mouth to feed in a desert that didn't forgive weakness. But he also looked at Hope and saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Hope. The word she'd chosen as a name was coming to life. If he can keep up, he can come. The next morning, the dog limped but followed. They'd named him Shadow because he followed Hope as if his life depended on it. Perhaps it did. They found the first signs of trouble at noon. Fresh tracks in a pass they should have been the first to cross in months. 6 riders, maybe 7, moving with purpose. They're tracking us, Samuel said, studying the marks. Or waiting for us ahead. She was right. At the next bend in the trail, hanging from a solitary cottonwood, they found a message. It wasn't subtle. A man hung from the branches, not by his neck but by his arms, skin marked with Malvado's brand. He was still breathing, barely. Samuel lowered him while Hope kept watch. The man was young, maybe 20, with the kind of face mothers remembered in their prayers. Water, he croaked. Hope gave him a drink while Samuel examined his wounds. They were deliberate, designed to cause maximum pain with minimum lethal damage. Who are you? Samuel asked. Tom Santos. I worked for Malvado. I tried to help a girl escape. This was my reward. Hope tensed. What girl? Don't know her name. They called her Shadow. She disappeared a week ago. Don Rodrigo went mad. Said someone had stolen her. Offered a bounty. His brother Diego is coming. With 20 men. Samuel and Hope exchanged glances. 20 men was a small army. Diego is worse than Rodrigo, Tom continued with difficulty. He likes pain. Wears a ring, golden serpent. Says it's his signature. He died before sunset. They buried him under a pile of stones, the best they could do in that hard land. Hope left a small cross made of tied sticks. I didn't know him, she said when Samuel looked at her questioningly. But he tried to help. That deserves to be remembered. They rode hard the rest of the day, moving away from the main trail. At nightfall, from a high hill, they saw the campfires. Many campfires, scattered across the valley like fallen stars. They're surrounding us, Samuel observed. No, they're hurting us. Like cattle to slaughter. She was right again. Diego Malvado wasn't just hunting them. He was directing them towards some specific place. The question was where and why. The answer came with dawn. Vulture Valley stretched before them, a scar on the earth where years ago a battle between the army and Apaches had left so many dead that vultures still circled out of habit. It was a perfect place for an ambush. A perfect place for an execution. And there, in the center of the valley, 3 wagons formed a semicircle. The campfires still smoked. Samuel counted 10 men, maybe 12. And in the center, like a spider in its web, was the man who could only be Diego Malvado. Even at a distance, the golden serpent ring glinted on his hand like a promise of venom. The duel at Vulture Valley. The sun was setting when they made their move, the narrator continued, his voice tight as a drawn bowstring. There was no way to avoid Vulture Valley, not with Diego's men closing the circle behind them. The only choice was to go through. Samuel and Hope crawled to an elevated position, using a dry ravine as cover. Shadow, the dog, stayed with the horses, as if understanding his role was to guard their only escape route. 10 men confirmed, Samuel whispered, passing her the spyglass. Plus those we can't see. Hope studied the camp. They're drunk. Look how they stagger. Except him. Diego Malvado was everything his brother wasn't. Where Rodrigo was fat and cruel out of cowardice, Diego was lean and cruel for pleasure. He moved among his men like a knife between fingers, always in control, always watching. We'll wait for more darkness, Samuel decided. No. They're waiting for me. If we wait, they'll get impatient and start searching. Now they're confident. It's too risky. Hope looked at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, he saw real fire in her eyes. Not just survival, but purpose. I've been running all my life. I'm tired of running. The plan was simple in its audacity. Samuel would create a distraction from the east while Hope slipped in from the west. Not to flee, but to reach Diego. Cut off the serpent's head. Samuel fired the first shot at dusk, dropping a sentry. The camp exploded in chaos, men running for weapons, firing at shadows. Samuel moved among the rocks, shooting and moving, never in the same place twice. Hope, meanwhile, moved like her old nickname. like a shadow. She'd taken Samuel's knife, the long one he kept for silent work. She passed two men so focused on the gunfight they never saw her coming. She didn't kill them. She wasn't a killer. But precise cuts to the hamstrings left them screaming and useless. Diego saw her coming. Of course he did. He was waiting for her. The famous shadow, he said, his voice soft as silk over steel. My brother was obsessed with you. Said you were special. That you had fire. Your brother was a pig. Diego laughed. Yes, he was. That's why I killed him. Hope stopped, surprised. Diego took advantage to continue. Did you think the fire at Clear Spring was an accident? Please. Rodrigo was weak. He sold people because he didn't know what else to do with his power. I collect them because I understand their value. I'm not a thing to collect. No. You're much more. You're a symbol. The girl who said no. The one who escaped. Do you know how many girls in how many places have heard your story? How many dream of being like you? They moved in a circle, predator and prey, though it wasn't clear who was which. That's why I need to kill you publicly. Painfully. So all those dreamers understand there's no escape. No hope. That's when he attacked. He was fast and trained. His first thrust almost opened her from belly to throat. But Hope had learned to fight in places where losing meant things worse than death. She dodged, cut, her knife finding his wrist. Diego's gun fell. He cursed and drew his own knife with his left hand. Better, he growled. Make it interesting. The knife dance continued while gunfire roared around them. Samuel had managed to reduce the enemy numbers, but a stray bullet had grazed him, staining his shoulder red. Diego was a better fighter than Hope. He had reach, strength, and training. But she had something he would never understand. Nothing to lose and everything to gain. When he attacked high, she went low. Her knife found his thigh, deep. Diego screamed and fell to his knees. Hope could have finished it there. The knife was in position, his neck exposed. But she stopped. Do it, Diego hissed. Or are you too weak? Hope looked at him, this man who traded in misery, who saw pain as art. And she made a decision that would destroy him more than any knife. You're not worth it, she said, lowering the weapon. You're not worth the weight on my conscience. You'll live, but you'll live knowing a thing spared your life. That you had less value to me than my own soul's peace. She turned to leave. The classic mistake, some would think. But Hope had read her enemy well. Diego's pride couldn't bear being forgiven. He lunged for his fallen gun with his last strength. The shot echoed through the valley. But it wasn't Diego who fired. Samuel, bleeding and staggering, had seen the movement. His bullet found Diego in the chest, throwing him backward. But Diego had managed to shoot too. Not at Hope, but at Samuel. The second shot hit him in the side, making him fall. No. Hope ran to Samuel, pressing her hands against the wound. Blood flowed between her fingers like water through a broken dam. Diego's remaining men, seeing their leader fallen and facing the fury in Hope's eyes, did the only sensible thing. They fled. The price of freedom. They worked through pain and exhaustion, the narrator said, voice now tinged with urgency. Hope had seen enough wounds to know this was serious. Samuel's bullet had entered his side, perhaps grazing a lung, definitely causing internal damage. Using supplies from Diego's abandoned camp, she improvised bandages. The fire they used to cauterize cattle wounds served to stop the worst of the bleeding. Samuel screamed once, then passed out, which was a mercy. Hope didn't cry. Tears were a luxury she'd forgotten how to afford. Instead, she worked with the ruthless efficiency of someone who refuses to accept any ending but survival. When Samuel woke, the sun was high and they were moving. She'd managed to tie him to his horse, leading both animals while Shadow limped alongside. Should have left me, he muttered. Shut up. Save energy. Diego. Dead. His men scattered. But more will come. Always more. They traveled like this for 2 days, stopping only when Samuel couldn't continue. Hope hunted rabbits with improvised traps and found water in places Samuel would never have thought to look. She kept him alive by sheer force of will. On the 3rd day, they reached a trading post. It wasn't much, just an adobe building and a corral, but it had what they needed: medical supplies and anonymity. The trader, a one-eyed old man named Joaquin, asked no questions when Hope paid with gold taken from Diego's camp. The bullet came out clean, Joaquin said after examining Samuel. He's lucky. Or maybe blessed. With rest and these medicines, he'll live. They stayed a week. Samuel is recovering, and Hope is watching. Shadow, the dog, recovered faster than either of them and was soon hunting mice in the storeroom. It was there, at that lost post between nowhere and nothing, that news arrived. A traveler brought it. along with supplies from the east. Heard about Clear Spring? The traveler asked while drinking watered beer. Massive fire. The Malvado hacienda burned to the foundations. Don Rodrigo is dead in the flames. His brother Diego disappeared, probably dead too. They say it was a settling of accounts between bandits. Hope looked at Samuel. Both knew Diego had died at Vulture Valley, not Clear Spring. Which meant? The slaves, she whispered. They rebelled. The traveler nodded. That's what some say. Though officially it was an accident. A kitchen fire that got out of control. He winked. Strange how all the doors were locked from the outside when it started, isn't it? That night, Hope sat by Samuel's bed. For the first time since he'd known her, he saw her cry. Not from sadness, but from something more complex. Relief, perhaps, or the weight of realizing her story had inspired others to take their own freedom. I wasn't alone, she said. All this time, I thought I was alone. Where names are born again. The narrator took a last sip of water before the conclusion. Samuel's ranch wasn't what Hope had imagined. In her dreams, when she allowed herself to dream, she'd imagined something grand and prosperous. Reality was more modest, but more real. An adobe house with 3 rooms, a stable that had seen better days, a well that never ran dry, and enough land to keep 50 head of cattle. It's not much, Samuel said as they stopped the horses in front of the porch. His voice was still weak from recovery, but his eyes were clear. It's perfect, Hope replied, and she meant it. The first days were an adjustment. Samuel is still recovering, moving slowly and resting frequently. Hope took the reins of the place with a naturalness that surprised them both. She repaired fences, tended cattle, and even got the old windmill working again. Shadow, the dog, found his place chasing rabbits and sleeping under the porch. At night, he'd lie between them as they sat by the fire, like a furry guardian of their strange family. It was on one of those nights, a month after arriving, that Hope made her announcement. I've chosen my real name, she said. Samuel looked up from the harness he was repairing. Oh, Brave Moon. She said it firmly, like planting a flag. My grandmother told me stories of an Apache warrior named that. She said the moon was brave because it shone even when the sun wasn't there to protect it. It's a good name. It's my name. She took out the copper locket he'd given her so long ago. Carefully, she placed it on the mantelpiece. I don't need it anymore, she explained. I've found my own beauty to keep. Winter came mild that year. They worked together preparing the ranch for the cold months. Samuel taught Luna, no one called her Hope anymore, to read and write. She taught him her grandmother's songs and how to find water in the driest desert. One afternoon, while they were repairing the stable roof, a group of riders appeared on the horizon. Luna tensed immediately, her hand going to the rifle she now always carried. But they weren't bounty hunters or ghosts from the past. They were 3 women and 2 children, all with the unmistakable marks of those who'd known chains. The woman leading the group dismounted carefully. She was young, maybe 20, with eyes that had seen too much. Are you Brave Moon? She asked. The one who escaped the Malvados. Luna looked at Samuel, then nodded. We heard your story in Clear Spring. Before the fire. It gave us hope. When the time came, we remembered someone had said no and survived. It made us think maybe we could too. What do you need? Work. A place to be people, not property. We can work hard. We just need a chance. Luna looked at Samuel again. He nodded almost imperceptibly. There's an old cabin north of the ranch, Luna said. It needs work, but it's solid. If you can fix it, you can stay. We'll share the ranch profits. And so the small ranch began to grow. Not in size, but in purpose. It became a refuge, a place where names were chosen instead of imposed, where the past could be buried and the future planted like seeds in good soil. Samuel lived 5 more years. They were good years, full of laughter neither of them thought they'd know again. When illness finally claimed him, he was surrounded by a family he'd chosen rather than been born into. Luna cried at his funeral, but she also spoke. She told everyone the story of the man who'd paid $3 not for a slave, but for the chance for someone to choose their own freedom. She lived 40 more years after that. She married a Mexican blacksmith who treated her like the sun treats dawn, with reverence and joy. They had 4 children, all raised with their Apache grandmother's stories and desert survival lessons. But more importantly, the ranch became legend. A place where the lost could find themselves, where the nameless could name themselves, where freedom wasn't just a word but a daily practice. When Brave Moon finally died at 73, she was buried next to Samuel on the hill overlooking the ranch. Her headstone didn't mention the names others had given her. It simply said, Brave Moon. She chose 1865 to 1938, and they say even today, if you travel far enough west, beyond where maps show roads, you can find that ranch. It's not called Cortez Ranch or Brave Ranch. It's simply called The Refuge. And on the porch, no matter the time of day, there's always someone waiting to ask your name. Not the one you were given, but the one you choose. Because that's the lesson Brave Moon taught, that freedom isn't just escaping chains. It's having the power to say, this is who I am. This is my name. This is my story. And in a world that insists on telling us who we are, that might be the bravest act of all. The storyteller leaned back, his tale finished. The fire had reduced to embers, and the desert stars shone like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and another answered. And the wind whispered chosen names, not given ones, across the land that never forgets those who dare to be free.